President of the Academy, past presidents, vice presidents, and fellows of the Academy, justices of the superior courts, members of the Ghana Bar Association, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Ghana's premier learned society, I warmly welcome you all to day 3 of this 3-day event, marking the 55th in the J.B. Danquah Lectures series. The J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures series was instituted in 1968 in memory of a foundation member of the Academy, Dr. Joseph Boachi Danquah, who died in prison in February 1965, fighting for freedom in all its manifestations. The event consists of a series of 3 lectures delivered on varying themes, ranging from law to philosophy to literature, medicine, health, religion, and nation building. The maiden lecture was delivered by His Excellency W.B. Van Leer, also a foundation member of the Academy, who at the time was Ghana's High Commissioner to Canada and had had a long and distinguished career at the bench. The theme for his presentation was the law, human rights, and the judiciary. You may download a copy from our website at www.gaas-gh.org. This event is being streamed live on the Academy's Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook platforms. The Danquah Institute is also streaming the lectures on its social media pages. Thanks to the combined efforts of the Danquah Institute, Owusu Dapa Law and Associates, and S.K. Boafo and Company Law Chambers, we are also transmitting this event live on Star 103.5 FM. This year, we have been generously supported by the following sponsors: Goyle Company Limited, the Danquah Institute, S.K. Boafo and Company, Owusu Dapa Law and Associates, Mr. Augustine Frimpong, GIPC, Lemont Foods Limited, and Accra Digital Rights Hub, which graciously offered to provide packed refreshments for our guests. Let's give these supporters a resounding round of applause. Thank you. Now, the chairman for tonight is Professor Kofi Opoku-Nti. Professor Kofi-Nti is the Vice President of the Arts Section and a member of the Council of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is a former Dean of the University of Ghana Business School and the first occupant of the Unilever Professorial Chair in Business at the University of Ghana, Legon. Professor Opokunti is a member of several academic societies that include Public Choice Society, Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences, and the European Association of Industrial Economists. Professor Nti is an expert in the field of game theory and specialized in competition and strategy in business and economics. He is a member of the Presidential Advisory Council on Science, Technology, and Innovation, Director of Universal Hospitals Group, Chairman of Claim Ghana Limited, and also Chairman and Managing Director of Lemont Foods Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our chairman for tonight, Professor Kofi Nti.
Thank you, Madam Honorary Secretary, Professor Helen Yita, and thanks for your kind introduction. President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, Vice President of the Arts section, of the Sciences section of the Academy, Fellows of the Academy, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, invited students, ladies and gentlemen, I have the singular honor of introducing to you the speaker for the 55th J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures, Professor Richard Frimpong Opon. I first met Professor Frimpong Opon when he co-edited a first script, a collection of scholarly essays honoring Nana Dr. S.K.B. Asante, a past president of the Academy. It was called A Commitment to Law, Development and Public Policy. To assemble, coordinate, and publish a 700-page book involving almost 50 authors spread across multiple continents is a testimony to his dynamism, organizational skills, and scholarly commitment. This evening, we are privileged to listen to the third and final lecture of Professor Opon's 2022 J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures. He proposes to examine how digital technology challenges the Ghana's legal system's regulatory function, with specific focus on consumer protection in digital marketplace and worker on digital labor platforms. Professor Richard Frimpong Opon is a professor of law at California Western School of Law in San Diego, USA. He was elected a fellow of the Academy in 2016. He's a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists and Scientists, an associate member of the International Academy of Comparative Law. He is called to the Ghana Bar. Professor Opon completed his PhD at the University of British Columbia and postdoctoral studies at the Coolidge School of Law, Dalhousie University in Canada. In addition, he holds a Master of Laws degree from Harvard Law School and a first-class Master of Laws degree in Commercial Law from the University of Cambridge, and a first-class Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Ghana. Professor Opon has taught and worked for academic institutions in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Ghana, South Africa, Tanzania, Malawi, and Uganda. In addition, he maintains teaching and research interest in a broad range of commercial and business law subjects, such as the law of contracts, international commercial contracts, international arbitration, international trade and international investment law, international business, economic transactions, and sale of goods law, and conflict of laws. Professor Opon has published 8 books, comprising 4 sole authored books, 2 co-authored books, and 2 co-edited books, and over 55 articles, book chapters, and book reviews. 2 of his sole authored books have been translated into Chinese. His publications include Conflict of Laws in Ghana, 2021, Private International Law in Nigeria, 2020, The Government of Ghana and International Arbitration, 2017, Private International Law in Commonwealth Africa, 2013, and Legal Aspects of Economic Integration in Africa, 2011. Some of his writings have won international prizes. He is frequently cited in academic publications and has been cited in judicial decisions. Professor Pong was a member of the working group of the Hague Conference on Private International Law that developed and drafted the Hague Principles on Choice of Law in International Commercial Contracts, 2015. In 2012, he held the Director of Studies Private International Law position at the Hague Academy of International Law. Law firms frequently consult him on significant transactions. In addition, he has acted as an arbitrator, counsel or consultant in major international and domestic arbitration before the ICC Court of Arbitration, London Court of International Arbitration Center. Professor Pong, it is my pleasure to invite you to the podium to address your audience.
Mr. Chairman, President and Fellows of the Academy, ladies and gentlemen, before I proceed to the substance of today's lecture, let me pay tribute to two Fellows of the Academy who also used their J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures to address technology and our national development needs. In his 1978 lectures entitled Technology, Human Dignity and National Development, Professor F.T. Sai emphasized the need for technology to be relevant and appropriate to the Ghanaian situation, especially the needs of our rural communities. Remarkably, he wrote about the technology of the computer and noted how computers were lying around in Ghana, which are not used fully and continuously. Yes, that was in 1976, 2 years before I was born. He perceptively noted, and I'm quoting, "In modern society, development without technology is impossible, but technological development, if unguided, is quite consistent with human degradation. It is consistent with the alienation of a people, the destruction of their culture, social structures, and their environment. By making them poor, whilst a few wax rich, they may be dehumanized or at least lose their individual and community dignity. This should not happen in Ghana," unquote. In his 2001 lectures entitled Technology for Development, The Case for a Developing Country, Ghana, Dr. Emmanuel Latte continued the theme of technology as an instrument for national development. In particular, he explored the extent to which Ghana can improve its capacity to develop, absorb, and effectively utilize technology through the provision of the right institutional and infrastructural base, as well as policies. I stepped into their footsteps in my first lecture, and I continue today by focusing on digital technology and the regulatory issues engendered in the digital marketplace and on digital labor platforms. In this third and final lecture, I will explore the manner in which digital technology challenges one of the principal functions of the Ghana legal system, namely its regulatory function. I will argue that while the state has sought to address some of the existing challenges using various legislation and policies, there remain significant gaps to be addressed. Such gaps exist in many areas. The digital world challenges the regulatory capacities of states in so many respects. These include the desirability of regulating the internet to protect privacy and the reputations of people, the need to tackle the phenomena of fake news, which threaten our democratic process, and the challenges posed by cybercrime and cross-border criminal activities facilitated by the internet. There is also the problem of the effectiveness of national regulation of digital technology without international collaboration in situations which involve cross-border transgressions. Time and space do not permit me to explore all these issues. Instead, in this lecture, I will focus on consumer protection in the digital marketplace and new working methods organized through digital labor platforms. These platforms in Ghana include BlackRide, Eziban, Glovo, iFetch, Swift Wheels, Bolt, Bolt Food, Jumia Food, Uber, and Yango. The digital marketplace and labor platforms are characterized by asymmetric relationships, that is, relationships in which there is often a weaker party. In this lecture, I argue that the regulatory powers of the Ghana legal system should be used to protect the weaker party in these relationships. I will first address the issue of consumer protection in the digital marketplace. Electronic commerce or e-commerce refers to the buying and selling of goods and services online. Consumer protection law seeks to protect the interests of consumers. It aims at fostering a market environment that will encourage more consumers to purchase goods and services. E-commerce has developed rapidly over the last decade in Ghana. Increasingly, people are abandoning customary visits to traditional marketplaces such as Makola, Kantamanto, and Asafo Market in favor of e-commerce platforms. A 2019 World Bank report noted that digital commerce is growing, positioning Ghana as the sixth country in Africa in business-to-consumer e-commerce in 2018. That is climbing 6 positions from its 2017 ranking. The bank went on to note that online shoppers grew from 3% in 2018 to 7.8% in 2019. Scholars have identified various reasons why consumers might favor the digital marketplace over the traditional market. These reasons include potential price savings, the opportunity to compare products and services from the comfort of a computer screen, and the ability to purchase goods and services with some degree of privacy. Nevertheless, the move from the physical to the digital marketplace raises questions of the capacity of the regulatory framework governing the pre-digital marketplace to meet the needs of e-commerce, especially regarding consumer protection. Indeed, the digital marketplace challenges legal frameworks that are rooted in an analog and tangible world. A favorable regulatory environment significantly influences the degree to which e-commerce thrives in countries around the world. Several regulatory issues affect e-commerce. These include electronic payment, data protection, cybersecurity, and consumer protection, the focus of this lecture. Consumer protection is more critical than ever in e-commerce. This is because consumer confidence in e-commerce is a prerequisite for consumer participation in the digital marketplace. The current Ghanaian legal framework for consumer protection is a mixture of common law, contract, and tort rules, as well as legislation. The common law rules are of general application. The legislation tends to focus on either goods or services. A significant component of the existing laws predate the advent of e-commerce. Regarding the sale of goods, the principal statute or legislation is the Sale of Goods Act of 1962. This legislation was based on the English Sales of Goods Act of 1893. The Supreme Court of Ghana has held that the Sale of Goods Act is the main source of Ghanaian law in contracts for the sale of goods. The court held that the rules of the common law and equity are subservient to the provisions of the Act. Accordingly, in essence, from a consumer protection perspective, the principal law regulating the sale of goods in Ghana resides in a predominantly 1960-year-old legislation, itself founded on a 129-year-old legislation. Clearly, the Sale of Goods Act was not made for our digital age. Unlike goods, the regulation of service contracts in Ghana consists of a patchwork of statutory rules. There are a host of legislation that regulate the provision of a variety of services, including financial, utility, health, and telecommunication services. Dr. Yindana has observed that laws dealing with these services are mainly concerned with the setting up, management, and operation of the diverse services to the consuming public. However, the laws do not specifically lay down identified substantive obligations for service providers, backed by express remedies for the consumers to avail themselves of when they are provided with defective services. In other words, even in these legislated areas, the level of consumer protection is low. Furthermore, many services such as the repair and servicing of goods, home improvement, entertainment, cleaning, construction services lack any significant consumer protection regulatory regime. The regime of consumer protection in respect of these services fall wholly within the domain of the common law. To the extent that they exist, Ghana's consumer protection laws can sometimes address the needs of both e-commerce and the traditional marketplace transactions. However, the preceding discussions reveal that even outside the context of e-commerce, consumer protection regarding the supply of goods and services in Ghana is unsatisfactory. Mrs. Donna Hammond has observed that until quite recently, there has not been a systematic and deliberate focus on the promotion of consumer protection policy as an integral part of the country's economic development. She further notes that the overall consumer protection regime in Ghana remains inadequate and uncoordinated in the absence of a comprehensive and harmonized policy, legal, and institutional framework. In essence, the current legal framework for consumer protection in Ghana can only offer piecemeal protection scattered across various legislation. I argue in this lecture that this fragmented consumer protection law and enforcement framework undermines the accessibility and certainty of the law. E-commerce and the specificities of the digital marketplace add to consumers' plight in this state of the law. Ghanaian consumers are faced with significant challenges and risks when they engage in e-commerce. A recent study identified a number of issues, including poor customer service, missed delivery, inferior product quality, and problems with return and refund. Other concerns include information asymmetry, unfair contract terms, misleading advertising, confidentiality and data protection, and inadequate remedies. Ghana government policy recognizes the imperative to extend consumer protection to the electronic commerce environment. Accordingly, the government has responded with some new legislation to protect consumers in the electronic commerce environment. The laws enacted for this purpose include the Electronic Transaction Act of 2008 and more recently, the Payment Systems and Services Act 2019. Section 46 to 54 of the Electronic Transactions Act are specifically devoted to consumer protection. The Act imposes on suppliers of goods a duty to disclose a defined list of information to consumers on their electronic platforms. Such disclosure is required to ensure that a consumer makes an informed decision about a transaction. In the digital marketplace, consumers have no opportunity to physically inspect the goods or services they are purchasing before they purchase them. This makes them vulnerable to deceptive marketing and unscrupulous business practices. Section 49 of the Act provides consumers with the right to cancel their orders within 14 days of receiving the goods or 7 days after concluding an agreement regarding services. However, the value of this right to cancel is significantly diminished. This is because the Act provides a very long list of transactions from which the statutory right to cancel does not apply. For example, the right is not provided for in the supply of foodstuffs, beverages, or other goods that are intended for everyday consumption and supplied to a consumer's home, residence, or workplace. In addition, e-commerce transactions can be international. For example, you can have a situation in which there's a Ghanaian resident purchasing goods from Nigeria or the United Kingdom via an electronic platform. The applicable law of such cross-border transactions is important. This is because countries often have divergent consumer protection laws, some of which might not provide the same level of consumer protection that is afforded by Ghanaian law. Section 53 and 44 of the Electronic Transaction Act are important in this regard. 53 makes the Act a mandatory law regarding contracts for the supply of goods to consumers in Ghana. And Section 54 stipulates that any provision in an agreement that excludes the consumer rights provided in the Act shall be null and void. Without these provisions, foreign suppliers of goods can use foreign choice of law clauses to negate the rights provided to consumers under the Act. In addition, these provisions afford a mechanism through which Ghana's consumer protection law is extended to businesses that are located outside. The Electronic Transactions Act does not, however, address the issue of jurisdiction, i.e., in terms of which court should be entrusted with resolving a dispute in international transactions. The Act leaves it to the parties to address this issue in their contract. In other words, the Act does not preserve access to the Ghanaian courts. This therefore raises the prospect that Ghanaian consumers could be subjected to foreign jurisdiction and international arbitration agreements. For example, YouTube and Facebook's agreement with users are subject to the jurisdiction of the courts in California. Similarly, Amazon's agreement is subject to the laws of the state of Washington and the courts of that state. What this means is that if a Ghanaian-based user of Facebook, YouTube, or Amazon has a dispute with these companies, the claim shall be litigated in California or the state of Washington, as the case may be. Such foreign jurisdiction agreements foreclose or at least make it difficult for Ghanaian consumers to litigate their claims in the Ghanaian courts. This notwithstanding, the Ghanaian courts have the power to render of no effect any agreement that requires consumers to subject themselves to foreign jurisdiction or international arbitration agreements. In the consumer context, I argue in this lecture that it would be appropriate for the courts to exercise such jurisdiction in many cases. The Ghanaian courts should enforce foreign jurisdiction and international arbitration agreements in consumer contracts with greater scrutiny and reluctance. This is because of the inherent power imbalance in consumer relationships. Unjustifiable restrictions on consumer access to the Ghanaian courts should not be countenanced. Indeed, courts in other countries have refused to enforce foreign jurisdiction and international arbitration agreements when weaker parties, such as consumers, are involved. As noted above, Sections 46 to 54 of the Electronic Transactions Act are specifically devoted to consumer protection. However, these sections generally do not impose minimum standards of conduct on suppliers of goods and services in the digital marketplace. I argue that this is inadequate to protect purchasers of goods in the digital marketplace. The legislator's assumption appears to be that the substantive obligations imposed on sellers of goods by statute and at common law are adequate. This is wrong because, as noted above, the Sale of Goods Act was not enacted for the digital age. Comparatively, Sections 44 to 47 of the Payment Systems and Services Act 2019 represent a significant advance in consumer protection in the Ghanaian digital marketplace. However, it's important to note that the regulatory regime provided by the Act is limited to electronic payment services and the issuing of money by electronic means. Unlike the Electronic Transactions Act, the Payment Systems Act imposed specific obligations on electronic money issuers and payment system providers. These include an obligation to adhere to statutorily defined universal principles of consumer protection, an obligation for marketing to follow general principles of honesty and transparency, an obligation to disclose fees and charges and advise consumers of changes in fees and such charges, and finally, an obligation to maintain a functional consumer complaint unit. I argue that there is need to impose similar substantive obligations on sellers of goods and service providers in the digital marketplace. The preceding discussion reveals commendable legislative effort to protect consumers in the digital marketplace. However, this lecture argues that the existing regulatory framework is fragmented, it is incomplete, and leaves many significant issues unaddressed. Therefore, further legislative intervention is advocated to better protect the interests of consumers in our digital marketplace. It is and would not be enough to rely on private mechanisms to address the needs of consumers in the digital marketplace. These mechanisms will include contractual negotiation and terms, industry groups or voluntary policies, and standards of service providers and those who sell goods. And there are several reasons why further legislative intervention is necessary. The existing laws do not cover the full panoply of what consumers purchase or access from the digital marketplace. The Sale of Goods Act, which I've noted as the principal legislation protecting buyers of goods in Ghana, has failed to keep pace with modern technological developments, leaving in its wake some significant questions. Advances in technology have made access to and consumption of digital content part and parcel of everyday life in Ghana. This digital content includes software, databases, electronic books, mobile phone applications, online games, and virtual items which are purchased with computer games. In Ghana, some of us now consume digital content as voraciously as we once did with print newspapers, print books, the good old Owari, Ludu, Ate, Mamene Papa, and and other, why are you laughing? And other platform games. The definition of goods in the Sale of Goods Act arguably does not cover digital content. If digital content is not considered goods or services, then we are in uncharted territory regarding consumer protection law in Ghana. And this is no idle concern. A contract for the sale of goods enjoys certain incidents and protections under the Sale of Goods Act. These incidents and protections may not necessarily be available under the general common law of contract. There is no legal certainty that terms that are similar to those implied by the Sale of Goods Act will be implied into contracts that are deemed outside the scope of the Act. In recognition of this problem, some areas of Ghanaian law have adopted a legislated, expanded definition of goods such that it potentially covers digital content. Further, the 2014 Consumer Protection Policy contains a broader definition of goods that potentially covers digital content, but the policy is certainly not legislation. Moreover, even if digital content is characterized as goods, consumers of free digital content will not enjoy any statutory protections under the Sale of Goods Act. This is because the Act only deals with contracts for which consideration is provided in the form of money. This may be contrasted with the situation which prevails in other jurisdictions. For example, in English law, if digital content is given away freely, for example, a free mobile phone application or software, the provider could still be liable if the digital content causes damage to the consumer's device. The challenges to consumer protection in the digital marketplace go beyond digital content. Advertising in the digital marketplace, the process of contracting, contractual terms, and dispute resolution are all engaged. Advertising is the common business practice, common business practice in both digital and traditional marketplaces, and the existing laws can work for both. However, two advertising tactics that are specific to e-commerce have emerged and may need targeted regulation. The first refers to celebrity or influencer endorsement of products and services through social media. The second consists of online consumer reviews and ratings that can, and indeed often do, influence consumer choice. These customer reviews and ratings can sometimes be manipulated to deceive consumers and damage businesses, but they largely remain unregulated. The Protection Against Unfair Consumer Act 2000 does not go far enough to regulate such reviews and ratings, especially those emanating from individuals. Contracting in the digital marketplace is also dominated by click-to-consent contracts. Consumers in the digital marketplace are contract takers, that they transact based on non-negotiated standard form contracts that are presented to them on a take-it-or-leave-it basis. These contracts are often impossible to read, frequently changed without adequate notice. Such contracts undermine the very notion of informed consent, which lies at the heart of contract law. Dispute resolution is an important part of consumer protection. In this regard, the Ghanaian courts certainly have a crucial role to play in advancing consumer rights in the digital marketplace. The courts can incrementally develop the common law to keep pace with societal needs, including e-commerce. In fact, our courts have already recognized the effectiveness of electronic contracts. In other cases, the courts have also demonstrated a willingness to develop the common law to protect consumers regarding issues that are not addressed in legislation. This is certainly commendable. One area where the courts may increasingly be called upon to intervene is in relation to the binding nature of terms in standard form contracts that are almost always utilized in consumer transactions within the digital marketplace. Unlike other countries, Ghana currently lacks a comprehensive legislation to regulate unfair contract terms, including exclusion clauses in consumer contracts. Mrs. Donna Hammond and Dr. Amma Hammond have noted that legislative control of terms of consumer contracts is a critical tool for promoting consumer welfare, which perhaps has not been sufficiently employed to that end in Ghana. They further note that there is an urgent need in Ghana for harmonized legislation regulating unfair contract terms in consumer and other contracts. In the absence of such legislation, Ghanaian common law, especially the equitable doctrine of unconscionability, remains the only mechanism for judicially policing unfair contract terms that are often found in standard form contracts. Therefore, I argue that the courts must be prepared to subject standard form contracts in the digital marketplace to closer judicial scrutiny. In this regard, the courts should not remain unduly wedded to notions of freedom of contract and party autonomy. Although the role of the courts in advancing the interests of consumers in the digital marketplace is acknowledged, judicial activism alone will be inadequate to address the interests of consumers in Ghana. The court's role in judicially developing Ghanaian consumer protection law is limited by the fact that most consumer claims are unlikely to find their way into the ordinary court system. This is because of the nature of consumer disputes, as well as the relative values of consumer claims. Moreover, unlike in other jurisdictions, no specialized court or quasi-judicial institutions are dedicated to consumer protection in Ghana. As a result, consumers in Ghana lack easily accessible institutions for an expedited and cost-efficient resolution of their consumer disputes. The Consumer Protection Bill presents an appropriate opportunity for Parliament to undertake a holistic review of consumer protection law in Ghana. There is a clear need for a one-stop statute or legislation on consumer protection that will address both the digital marketplace and the traditional market environment. Furthermore, there is no central regulator with broad legislative or oversight responsibility for consumer protection in Ghana. Rather, consumer protection functions are directly and implicitly embedded in various legislation and dedicated or devoted to certain state agencies such as the National Communication Authority, the Food and Drugs Authority, and the Public Utilities and Regulatory Commission. This lecture argues for a central regulator to minimize overlapping regulatory mandates, ensure consistent policies, and reduce the potential for conflict between the rules promulgated by the different government agencies. I will now turn my attention to work organized through digital labor platforms. The world of work is changing rapidly. For many, the standard 9-to-5 roles performed in the four corners of an office, factory, or the like are giving way to flexible working patterns, including work in the so-called gig economy. The digital world has enabled new ways of working fundamentally altering how workers sustain themselves. One such new way of working involves digital labor platforms, such as Bolt and Uber. In Ghana, gig work has arguably been a feature of the work landscape for a very long time. Many entrepreneurial Ghanaians already hustle to feed their families by doing multiple jobs, usually in an informally structured work environment. In 2014, a young man captured the essence of this form of working in a viral video with his colloquial refrain, "Pak Pak Pak movement." This mantra has subsequently been immortalized by the musician Guru, also in a catchy hit song with the same refrain, "Pak Pak Pak movement." In modern times, the gig economy implies digitally mediated and primarily short-term work performed on a project-to-project or gig-to-gig basis. It has been suggested that although still quite small in much of Africa, the gig economy is burgeoning, especially in on-demand services ranging from the delivery of fast food to more sophisticated duties such as accounting and editing. In a short but provocative paper, Nwango and Porteous admonished us to recognize the truth about the future of work in Africa. In their words, this future isn't in the growth of full-time formal sector jobs. The future of work will be people working multiple gigs within somewhat informal entities. The new ways of working via digital platforms present a challenge to traditional concepts of employment law in many countries. In many countries, they have tested the boundaries of the protections extended to workers by domestic labor legislation. Gig work on digital labor platforms has been accused of fragmenting and increasing the casualization of work. Workers are usually deemed as independent contractors or self-employed in the gig economy environment. A trilateral relationship exists regarding gig work on digital labor platforms, namely the relationship between the service provider, the consumer, and the digital platform owner. The focus of this part of the lecture is on the relationship between the service provider and the digital labor platform owner. At present, in Ghana, there are several digital labor platforms that enable these new ways of working. A November 2021 Fair Work Ghana report estimates that 60,000 to 100,000 Ghanaians rely on the platform economy for their livelihood. Scholars have identified several benefits of working in the gig economy. These advantages include flexibility, reduced time and cost in finding and offering employment, access to broader range of employment opportunities, opportunities for talent to be easily identified, and opportunities for people to earn reasonable wages paid promptly. However, one of the main challenges of those who work through digital labor platforms is the lack of proper regulation or policy governing their relationship with the platform owners. This situation often exposes people working via such platforms to limited or no work protections or benefits. The challenges faced by digital platform workers in Ghana have been recently described by Fair Work Ghana as follows, and I quote, "Empirical evidence increasingly reveals that Ghanaian platform workers face substantial challenges in the course of their work. Their pay is often poor, not allowing them to earn the minimum income necessary for them to meet their basic needs. Workers also report facing unsafe and dangerous working conditions and receiving little support from the platforms when they do experience accidents, robberies, or other incidents. Workers also lack protections afforded to formal employees, like sick pay and employment benefits, and they are additionally vulnerable to arbitrary termination, often based on inequitable regimes of consumer ratings and left without recourse to a proper appeals process. In Ghana, the principal legislation on workers' rights consists of the Constitution and the Labor Act 2003. The Labor Act applies to all workers and all employers, and a worker is defined as a person employed under a contract of employment, whether on a continuous, part-time, or temporary basis. This necessarily excludes from the scope of the Act any person who does not work under a contract of employment or who is defined as self-employed. And these people make a significant part of the labor force in Ghana. A person's employment status as an employee or as an independent contractor provides the gateway to many statutory and common law rights. The question whether an individual worker should properly be classified as an employee instead of as an independent contractor has considerable significance for workers, businesses, and the public generally. Indeed, in the labor market, employment status is central. Before the advent of new forms of working on digital labor platforms and the efforts by owners of such platforms to ensure that people working for them do not do so under employment contracts, scholars such as Professor Doji Chikata, a fellow of the Academy, wrote about the unregulated, precarious, and insecure nature of informal work in Ghana. Indeed, many of the regulatory issues affecting work on digital labor platforms recur with informal work outside such platforms. Within the existing regulatory framework, most workers on digital labor platforms would be characterized as independent contractors rather than employees. In fact, the business model of digital labor platform owners assumes that their service providers are independent contractors as opposed to employees. Although, as noted above, the Labor Act only applies to persons employed under a contract of employment, it is arguable that constitutional protections of economic rights are not so limited. The rights provided in Article 24(1) of the Constitution extend to every person, unquote. Thus, a person's employment status as an employee or independent contractor is not material to enjoying the rights in Article 24(1). The rights provided in Article 24(2) and 24(3) are simply for every worker, unquote. However, the Constitution does not define the term worker. Accordingly, I argue that there is room for the Supreme Court to creatively interpret this provision to ensure that it embraces the new forms of work on digital labor platforms in Ghana. This lecture argues that in the context of Article 24 of the Constitution, worker includes anyone in the world of work, irrespective of their contractual status. Several provisions of the Constitution use the word employee. However, it is noticeable that the concept of employee is avoided or is at least not used in Article 24. In essence, Article 24 recognizes that certain rights are so fundamental that they should be available to anyone working, regardless of their employment status. As part of the supreme law of Ghana, I argue in this lecture that the rights contained in Article 24 are mandatory. They apply regardless of foreign law as the applicable law of a contract of employment. In other words, even if a contract between a digital labor platform owner and a service provider is, as is usually the case, governed by foreign law, it does not exclude the application of the rights conferred in Article 24. The above suggests that litigation and the courts represent a means through which persons providing services on digital labor platforms in Ghana may clarify their employment status. And comparatively, this is already happening in other jurisdictions, such as Canada, South Africa, the United Kingdom, and Kenya. There is evidence that the government of Ghana recognizes the regulatory challenges posed by these new forms of working, even though not much has been done from the legislative standpoint. For example, in 2019, there was a statement of understanding between the Ministry of Transport and Uber. In that statement of understanding, it was noted that there would be discussions aimed at, unquote, introducing a new forward-looking regulatory regime that explicitly contemplates ride-sharing technology and regulates its use and adoption by both passengers and the individual drivers and transport companies that use it as a source of business. However, to date, such a regulatory regime has not been developed. One may argue that expanding the statutory definition of worker to include those who work on digital labor platforms would solve the regulatory issues affecting them. However, as scholars have demonstrated, even with some adjustment to the legal definition of employment, many people who work on digital labor platforms would still be characterized as independent contractors. Furthermore, as Friedman has noted, platforms are adept at reconfiguring their conditions of work to avoid the legal definition of employee, or at fragmenting their corporate structure to evade the jurisdiction of courts in the region where workers find themselves. Thus, the real question concerns what legal protection the state may afford to such persons regardless of their employment status. The Fair Work Project has proposed 5 indicators around which a regulatory response could be built regarding labor standards for people working on digital labor platforms. These comprise fair pay, fair conditions, fair contract, fair management, and fair representation. In a November 2021 Fair Work Ghana report, they studied 10 digital labor platforms in Ghana, and their study revealed that most of the platforms fared poorly on these 5 indicators. Nevertheless, the state's ability to regulate labor standards on digital labor platforms is challenged by the transnational nature of the relationship on these platforms. A contract between the digital labor platform owner and the service provider are often governed by foreign law and subject to the jurisdiction of foreign courts or arbitration. In some instances, the actual work performed or service providers may have crossed borders. This raises questions about the extraterritorial reach of national labor laws and the effectiveness of choice of law clauses in employment contracts. In addition, many digital labor platforms also are financially powerful and politically connected, which raises questions over the ability of a developing country like Ghana to effectively regulate their activities. In the absence of state-sanctioned regulatory framework, contract remains the principal source of protection for the rights of people who work on digital labor platforms. Through contract, digital labor platform owners and service providers set the terms of their relationship. For example, it is well known that under Uber's contract with its partner drivers, the parties specifically agree that their relationship is solely that of a principal and an independent contractor. The parties also agree that their agreement is not an employment contract, and it does not create an employment relationship between the two. These provisions are carefully designed to ensure that the drivers are not characterized as employees with the attendant rights and obligations to be enjoyed under Ghanaian law. At the same time, contract law provides doctrines and principles to mitigate the potentially adverse consequences of such power imbalance. Contract law principles against unfair contract terms and exclusion clauses, including the doctrine of unconscionability, may be deployed by the courts to protect those who work on digital labor platforms in the same way as has been advocated in respect of consumer contracts. The Ghana Trade Union Congress has a role to play in advocating protections against unfair practices by owners of digital labor platforms for those working on their platforms. In Australia, South Africa, and the UK, the trade unions there have sought to protect people who work via digital labor platforms against the platform owners, using a combination of information gathering, campaigning, organizing, and litigation support. There is increasing recognition that the several platforms in existence for organizing people who work on such labor platforms, such as Facebook pages, WhatsApp pages, and online forums, are inadequate to realize the rights of such persons. There is already evidence of a desire to organize among platform workers in Ghana. In addition to WhatsApp and Facebook groups, associations such as the National Alliance of Digital Drivers Union Ghana, Ghana Online Drivers Union, and the Takrade Online Drivers Association have been formed. The Trade Union Congress must take greater interest in the plight of those who work on digital labor platforms in Ghana, in the face of what appears to be a clear regulatory void, as identified in this lecture. Without doubt, there are significant obstacles to collective organizing for digital labor platform workers. These obstacles include the fact that such workers often work alone. They compete with each other for work, and they face the prospect of being deactivated from the platform if the platform owners determine that they are disruptive or are a real threat to their business. This lecture has focused on labor relations issues that arise on digital labor platforms. There are, however, other regulatory issues that time and space would not allow me to explore. For example, regarding ride-hailing services such as Uber and Bolt, the existing regulatory regime, which was originally established to govern the operations of conventional taxis and trotros, is inadequate to regulate these ride-hailing services. The effect of this regulatory gap is that public agencies such as district assemblies that have traditionally regulated aspects of transportation services in Ghana do not have any real oversight regarding the activities of these ride-hailing services. This lack of regulatory oversight poses a risk to consumer safety because in such an environment, the responsibility to ensure consumer safety is solely within the purview of the ride-hailing service providers. Further, it fuels concern of unfairness and uneven playing field leveled against ride-hailing service providers by taxi and trotro operators. This lecture argues that the government should appropriately extend the reach of its regulatory authority to ride-hailing service providers. Now turn my attention to the conclusion for today's lecture before I do the conclusion for all the three lectures. In a paper marking the centenary of the Supreme Court ordinance, Justice Dateba, a fellow of the Academy, noted that, and I'm quoting, any modern conception of contract law must include a recognition of the public control element as part of the very essence of the modern contract. This lecture demonstrates that recognition of the public control element in contract law is more urgent than ever. This lecture has examined the vulnerabilities of consumers in the digital marketplace, exposing the inadequacies of the existing regulatory framework to address the needs of consumers in the Ghanaian digital marketplace. The lecture has consequently advocated enacting one-stop legislation on consumer protection to address e-commerce and traditional market environment transactions. This lecture has likewise examined the lack of adequate legal protection for people who have taken to the new working methods that are organized through digital labor platforms. Accordingly, I have advocated for legislation to recognize the reality that workers who provide services on digital labor platforms such as Uber and Bolt are entitled to the rights conferred on workers that Ghanaian law provides. I recommend the Law Reform Commission to work on issues raised in this lecture with a view to making proposals for appropriate legislative reform. I have argued that in the absence of legislative intervention, the courts have a critical role to play in developing Ghanaian consumer law and employment law to keep pace with e-commerce and the evolving nature of work in the digital age. In performing this role, the court should not be unduly wedded to classical notions of freedom of contract. Rather, the court should recognize the vulnerability of consumers in the Ghanaian digital marketplace and also that of service providers engaged through digital labor platforms. Mr. Chairman, President and Fellows of the Academy, to conclude these 55th J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures, I would like to thank you most profoundly for the great honor of being invited to deliver these lectures. You have granted me a most singular privilege. In his 1976 J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures, Professor F.T. Sai noted that Dr. Danquah's whole life related to the total concern of the Ghanaian. Dr. Danquah was, in his words, concerned about the ordinary Ghanaian and his life. In his 1974 lecture entitled The Man J.B. Danquah, Mr. Joe Appiah described Dr. Danquah as a child of controversy. In my 3 lectures, I have focused on issues that will profoundly affect the lives of ordinary Ghanaians over the coming years. I have tried to be provocative in the hope that these lectures would stimulate debate and deep and sustained conversation about our legal system in the age of digitalization. Digitalization is gathering pace in Ghana. There is not much that we can do to stem this tide, and no excuse for ignoring it as it occurs. On a personal level, we are indeed fortunate to witness this epochal transition from an analog to a digitalized Ghana. However, we need to decide whether the Ghana legal system will be a victim or a beneficiary of the advances brought by digitalization. My 3 lectures have argued that digitalization challenges our legal system in multiple ways, but at the same time, our legal system can benefit from digitalization. Mr. Chairman, President and Fellows of the Academy, I hope we choose to seize this opportunity even as our legal system approaches its sesquicentennial in 2026. Mesdames, Messieurs. Mr. Chairman, Allow me to acknowledge and thank various individuals and organizations whose support made these lectures possible. Time and space will not allow me to mention everybody. Accordingly, I limit myself to only a few, and I will take about 5 minutes. I am grateful to my ever-loving and dear wife, Joyce Okofuaje, and my 3 daughters, Emerald, Zoe, and Elizabeth, for their support and for providing me the necessary home environment to write these lectures. Zoe deserves special mention. She selected all the suits and ties that I have used for these lectures. Accordingly, if there have been any deficiencies in my sartorial choices, you have a 10-year-old girl to blame. I am grateful to my parents, Mary Ajay and James Frimpong, for instilling in me the values of education and hard work. Regrettably, they did not live to see this day, but I hope Dr. J.B. Danquah is pleased with my lectures, and he will extend a warm invitation to them for a meal in heaven. I am grateful to my siblings for their support. I especially acknowledge the support of Dr. Frimpong Frank, who traveled all the way from Kumasi to be with me these 3 days. Dr. Solomon Frimpong Amwati provided me research assistance. Augustine Anane Frimpong provided financial support for these lectures. I appreciate the encouraging words I received from my sister, Benedicta Frimpong, and my brothers, Professor Asumi Frimpong of KNUSC Department of Electrical Engineering, and Entry Frimpong of Victoria, Canada. Let me distinctly acknowledge 3 friends. First is my friend and adopted brother, Dean Dr. Ernest Owusu-Dapaah of KNUST Faculty of Law. Dean Dapaah has been supportive of my academic work and family in ways too numerous to enumerate here. Thank you very much, Ernest. The second is my dearest friend and sister in Christ, Teki Akwete, founder and executive director of the Africa Digital Rights Hub and a financial supporter of these lectures. Thank you, Ms. Akwete. Third is my big brother, Mr. Alexander Osewusu of Cardinal Law Group, Accra. He has been very supportive of me in so many ways. I am grateful to Nana Dr. SKB Asante, Justice Datiban, Professor Techua Menu, all fellows of the Academy, and Professor James Cooper of California Western School of Law for reviewing these lectures, providing me with helpful feedback and comments and directions to additional sources to read. Nana Dr. SKB Asante deserves special mention. Nana has been very supportive of my academic work since Professor Justice Mensah Bonsu recommended me to him as a research assistant in 2001. Thank you, Nana, and thank you, Professor Justice Mensah Bonsu. I am grateful to my classmates from unquestionably the best senior high school in Ghana, Opokuwari School, for supporting me and attending these lectures. Especially Elder Ebenezer Echampong, whose school's number is 8161. I am grateful to my classmates from Legon and the Ghana School of Law. I'm indebted to the students from the University of Ghana School of Law and the UPSA Law School who organized and attended these lectures. Thank you very much. I am grateful to my former teachers, especially Mr. G.A. Sapon, who took time off his busy schedule to attend all these 3 lectures. Thank you very much, Mr. Safo. I hope I fare well under your pen when you grade these lectures in the comfort of your home. I am grateful to the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mr. Godfred Yeboah-Dame, and the President of the Ghana Bar Association, Mr. Yao Boafo, the Deans of the various faculties of law, and the Director of the Ghana School of Law for also supporting these lectures. I am grateful to the students from all the high schools that have been here over the past 3 days. I am equally grateful for the financial support provided by the sponsors of these lectures. Their names have been noted before each of the 3 lectures, so I will not rehearse them here. I'm equally grateful to the organizers of this event, especially Mr. Francis Ankra and his team. Finally, I am grateful to each and every one of you for taking time off your busy schedule to attend these lectures in person and online. Thank you very much.
Well done, very well done. Let's give him a round of applause. This is a very fascinating lecture on the regulatory role in the digital marketplace and in the digital labor platforms. I noticed that Professor Opong is he organizes his talk in a very clear time frame. We start at 5:45 and he ends at 6:45, right? In all 3 lectures, he did very well. Yeah. The idea is that on the labor market, labor platforms, the idea was that there's an asymmetric relationship between the parties that are involved, the consumer and the provider, whether it's a service or a product. And he identified the kinds of things that can go wrong and how our current laws are not designed to address those questions. And I found that quite useful. In the digital marketplace, one worries about the identity of the counterparties. When I'm behind my computer and I send a message out, anybody can pretend to be the other party. And you don't really know who you are dealing with. So that aspect creates a lot of room for manipulation. That is, somebody can go between your message and the one you are sending it to and extract it and pretend to be the person and start to manipulate you. And he made a point about that in advertising, the celebrity endorsements and ratings reviews can be manipulated. And that's precisely because the counterparty can target you and basically create an echo chamber where they can create a world that is really different from what really exists. And whether it's in the form of fake news or whether it's in the form of giving you false information and letting you think of what is there is not really what it is. And in fact, that's the reason why the people who do fraud are able to manipulate their parties and get them become confident, and then eventually they scam them. The other idea was also that of the cross-border transactions. Again, your party could be in a different country, whether it's Amazon or whether it is Uber or whatever. They form the contract, and then you deal with them. And then he's pointing out that the jurisdiction becomes a problem because we don't know what jurisdiction should really apply. And he, as a fair player, wants to make sure that Ghana laws have a way of intervening when there are jurisdictional issues. And I think that's very important. And he recognizes that even though we are a small country, we must have some control about things that happen within our jurisdiction. I heard very often the voice of Professor Justice Datuba, because that was the idea that he had about how international contracts should be ratified by Ghana Parliament before it really can be accepted. And that is one of those themes. And then we also heard from the voice of Dr. S.K.B. Asante when you look at the counterparty, the asymmetry of power, and how there should be some kind of a balancing act to equalize the power between the two parties. On the digital labor platform, the critical issue is whether there are issues such as when you send somebody out and he has an accident, what should be the responsibility of the service provider? Like you send somebody to deliver some pizza to somebody and they had an accident. I don't know how they settle that, but definitely there are risks of the people delivering the service, whether it's Uber or Bolt or whatever, and how do you handle those kinds of issues? Maybe insurance can play a role, and maybe one could take some kind of liability things to counteract those questions. But the real issue, I think, is the question of whether they are self-employed or whether they are employees. And this is a big debate. And in fact, in California, where Uber is based, there was even, California likes to do propositions. When they do elections, they will put something to the electorate. Do you think that Uber workers are employees or self-employed? And of course, it was a big debate. It was on the ballot, and the Uber types fought very hard to make sure that vote went in their favor. So they agreed on that proposition that the gig workers are still gig workers. They are self-employed. So it's kind of interesting whether Ghana can do something counter and stimulate a different type of debate. But certainly that is the key question. And then if you add innovations such as self-driving automobiles, which the companies are interested in, whether if they extend them to become employees of millions and millions of people, whether they might not decide then that they should go with the self-driving automobiles, right? So those are questions, because everything you do in regulation leads to counter moves by the affected parties. We also should keep in mind that regulations have a way of giving us unintended consequences. And sometimes we have good intentions, but then the people who take over in managing the regulations then become a power unto themselves, and then they do whatever they want, and then the benefits don't go the way that we want. So one should be cautious in introducing regulatory policies, because sometimes it can be costly, and sometimes the impact on the targets can even exceed the cost that the regulatory function itself imposes. So these are really thought-provoking ideas, and I really appreciate what Professor Frimpong has delivered today. And let's give another round of applause. Well done.
Thank you very much, Professor Kofinti, for those closing remarks. Appreciation, please. Thank you. We have come to the end of day 3 of the 55th in the series of the J.B. Danquah Memorial Lectures. Before we leave, I'd like to acknowledge the schools that have been here with us this evening to listen to this lecture. They are the University of Ghana School of Law, the University for Professional Studies, Accra School of Law, the Mount Crest University College, Accra, Accra College of Education, Presbyterian Senior High School, Legon, Accra Technical Training College, Accra Academy, Accra Wesley Girls, Kaneshi, and Accra Girls, Mamobi. A round of applause, please. Thank you very much for, some of you have been here with us from the first day, and you have continued to be with us until the end. We cannot thank you enough. There's a proverb in my culture that says, if you walk a lot, you will see a lot. We have been walking alongside our speaker for the past 3 days. We have certainly seen a lot. I can only hope that what we have seen will not stay in our eyes, but will take us forward and help us to achieve a more just system as far as digitalization is concerned. As we leave, I'd like to announce that we have packaged refreshment right out in the foyer. Pick up a bag of food and drink as you leave. Thank you all very much. We hope that you will join us again as we continue with the rest of our lectures and other activities for the coming months. Thank you. If you could please stand while I leave with the speaker and the chairman.